This is the story about a group of friends who traveled through the many oceans in search of a great getaway spot. What started out as them going through the deepest parts of the island jungles turned into something bigger than they could ever imagine.
See guys, I told you, we'll finally make it here eventually.
Oh, come on, man. That took us so long. And you told us this was gonna be fun.
I think his definition of fun is a lot more obscure than ours.
Alright guys, just follow me please. Hey, what the hell is that?
Oh, damn. That thing's chasing AZ. Quick, we have to do something.
You might be wondering what the point of all of that was. Well, keep wondering. Let me ask you something. What do you think about when you hear the word video game classics? Now, for a lot of people, that can mean many things. A classic game could be something from the NES or the Super Nintendo. Maybe it's something from their childhood, like PS1, maybe PS2, some PS3 even. Hell, for some it could be games from 5 years ago on the PS4 and Xbox One. But when most people generally think of that term, it's usually arcade gaming. Arcades, in my opinion, are what truly jump-started the video game industry. Without arcades, gaming as a medium would definitely not be as big as it is nowadays. And who's to blame? Arcades was so influential with the amount of games there are around at the time. You got Street Fighter, Tekken, Mortal Kombat. You got games like Space Invaders and Galaga, and of course, Pac-Man. But along with all those games, one truly stood out. The most popular arcade game, and that's of course Pac-Man. Obviously it's Pac-Man, but besides Pac-Man, it's definitely Donkey Kong. Yes, you have read the title of this video right. This is a video on Donkey Kong Country, but the story of this game is also the story of Donkey Kong, and Mario, and Nintendo. Yeah, I know it's a lot of stories, but let's just start off with the basics. Now, the Donkey Kong series is one of the most important series when it comes to talking about Nintendo's success. You see, back in the day, Nintendo used to make toys, and they were really popular until the 70s rolled around. At that point, they decided to enter the world of video games in hopes of reaching new success, and Donkey Kong was their breakout title. Donkey Kong stood out amongst most arcade games back in the day. Games were either shooters or maze-like games such as Pac-Man. What made Donkey Kong unique was that it was one of, if not the, first ever platforming action game. Donkey Kong was significant as it was one of the first ever games which would allow a character to jump. Now that may sound small, but trust me, back in the day, this was a big deal and essentially changed the way people looked at video games. Games could be more than just the same objects doing the same things on one plain static screen. Now you could have level design and characters doing things. Donkey Kong is a very simple game when you get down to it. You got your three main characters. You got your protagonist named Jumpman. The gorilla, in fact, is actually the one named Donkey Kong. I don't know why I did that. I mean, I guess it's because everybody loves the bad guy. And of course, you have your damsel in distress. Gameplay wise, it's a very simple game. All you have to do is jump. Now that may sound simple, but the game tests you and does different unique things with jumping. The first stage you have to climb up the ladders and get to the top while jumping over these barrels, which are obstacles that stop you. The next level you have to jump across, but they're now enemies and power-ups to collect. The final level you have to not only jump but also remove the platform blocks so that Donkey Kong can fall off. Again, very simple concept, but the game actually takes full advantage of this and does unique things. And as stated earlier, this game became a massive success for Nintendo. And of course, like all successful things, you milk it dry. The next game we got in the series was Donkey Kong Jr., which sort of acted as a role reverse of sorts. You see, after Donkey Kong, Jumpman decided to take the gorilla, and now his son is after him. And this was a bold decision, making the hero of the last game the villain, but makes sense, after all, everybody loves the bad guy. And there's not much I can really say about this game. It improves upon the last game in terms of controls, and it has interesting level design, and more levels for the matter. But otherwise, it's basically more or less just more Donkey Kong, with the most interesting thing being the role reverse. Donkey Kong Jr. was still a really successful game, not as successful as the original, but still generally successful, and was successful enough to not only get a sequel, but also a spin-off. The creators decided to give the protagonist of the last game, Jumpman, his very own title, called Mario Bros, which not only gave the character his now iconic name, but also gave him his brother, Luigi. And I guess all of this was done to give the character some character development. 40 plus years later, and that's still the only character development he's ever got. The Mario Bros series is much different from Donkey Kong. Now, the character still has his iconic jumping ability, but the overall structure is much different from those Donkey Kong games. I guess this is a way to emphasize it being a spin-off. In terms of the main Donkey Kong series, we got Donkey Kong 3, which out of all the games in the trilogy was the most different. I guess as a way to make sure the game sells more, they decided to emphasize it being a shooter slash platformer. I guess so that it can tie into Space Invaders as well as the platforming genre. And out of all the games, it was the least well received, mainly because of the fact that it was so different from the last games. Donkey Kong 3 was not a successful title, and it disappointed many players. With that, Nintendo didn't know what to do. The only successful thing they had now was literally the character of Mario. After all, Mario is what started the platforming genre. He's what made Donkey Kong a household title. His gameplay mechanic of jumping is what made those games. And the Mario spin-off, Mario Bros, actually sold well, and it actually impressed many players. So with that, Nintendo had an idea. You see, they were trying to move outside of the arcade scene and into the world of home consoles, and they decided what better way to introduce the worldwide to this new home console system than bring in the most popular character of all time at that point, Mario. Super Mario Bros. Is the flagship platforming game. It's what practically defined the genre. It expanded the concepts that Donkey Kong introduced and made it its own thing, making a genre that's been copied to death. Now, I've already tackled Mario before in a previous video, but to simply put it, Mario emphasized jumping. It emphasizes overcoming obstacles, attacking enemies, fighting bosses, and going on a grand adventure. And as I stated before, it took what Donkey Kong had, being the jumping mechanic, and turned it into something fully fledged. It truly expanded what that game had before it. And the Mario series was a huge success. I mean, it spanned multiple titles, multiple spin-offs. Mario truly became the new face of Nintendo. And that kind of sidelined Donkey Kong. Super Mario pretty much abandoned the Donkey Kong identity, with barely any references to Donkey Kong in the games, and with that, Donkey Kong became sort of a lost game. Sure, people still remember the original arcade title, but outside of that, there's nothing really much of Donkey Kong in the modern age of Nintendo. That is until the 90s rolled around. The 90s was a new fresh start for Nintendo, with new consoles, new graphics, new games, and of course, revitalization of older titles. The new era of the SNES console was all about improving the old and making it bigger, bolder, and fresher than ever, and with that came an opportunity to bring back Donkey Kong. But how do you do that? I mean, Super Mario Bros. Was practically the expanded version of Donkey Kong. It pretty much made it bigger, bolder, and fresher. So how do you now do that with the actual ape in it? This was a difficult question Nintendo had to answer, but with their intelligence, creativity, and the help of a new international company by their side, they were able to properly answer this question. And with all of that said, it's now a better time than ever to finally talk about spoilers, I guess, but Donkey Kong Country is a really freaking good game, and I mean really freaking good. Donkey Kong Country is one of the best examples I've seen of how to do a video game reboot. DKC was by no means an easy title to make, but somehow Nintendo and Rareware were able to truly evolve the Donkey Kong formula. They took out the elements from the previous three titles and reimagined them for a modern audience, while still staying true to what made Donkey Kong, Donkey Kong. They even took out elements that Mario contributed to the series in order to create the true ultimate DKC experience. When DKC finally released, it was received with critical acclaim for its graphics, gameplay, level design, and music, and is generally regarded as one of the best games of all time. Some even consider it better than Mario's previous titles. And with all of that said, the legacy of Donkey Kong Country stayed strong, with sequels following, 3D platformers, a reboot of the series later down the line, music albums, concerts, and much more. Donkey Kong Country really was the ultimate reboot and truly revitalized the Donkey Kong franchise. Now, with everything finally being laid out, I think it's a better time than any to finally dissect this game and truly explain why it's such a magical title. Donkey Kong Country opens up with a little intro, showcasing an old gorilla standing on platforms from the original Donkey Kong game, and this heavily implies that this old gorilla is in fact the original Donkey Kong and that the new character you're playing must be either his son or grandson. And with that comes a whole lot of weirdness. You see, if the old gorilla named Cranky Kong is supposed to be the original Donkey Kong and the new one is supposed to be son, then that technically makes the new Donkey Kong Donkey Kong Jr. Now, to a lot of you, that may make sense. This makes sense to be Donkey Kong Jr. But this is where it gets confusing. You see, back in the early developments of this game, you were supposed to play as both Donkey Kong and Donkey Kong Jr. But Nintendo didn't really like the new design for Jr. So they just decided to make him a new character named Diddy Kong. Then if they were planning on having Donkey Kong Jr., then this doesn't make him Donkey Kong Jr. And you can make the argument that Rare didn't know about the game Donkey Kong Jr. and put the idea of making Donkey Kong's son was their own original concept. But there's a lot of elements in this game that also suggest that this is Donkey Kong Jr. The first piece of evidence is the fact that Donkey Kong Jr. is the only playable Kong in the original arcade games, and it makes sense for him to be the playable Kong in the new game series. But this is a light comparison. But there are other evidence as well. The levels you play through in Donkey Kong Jr. are similar to the level themes we see in Country. Also, some of the enemies in Donkey Kong Jr. look like the ones in this game. And finally, the most obvious piece of evidence I can come up with is the fact that Donkey Kong Jr. is the only Kong who wears clothing with his name on it. And wouldn't you guess it, this Kong also has clothing with his name on it. So, I guess this is supposed to be Donkey Kong Jr. The story of Donkey Kong Country follows our titular character, Donkey Kong, as he's relaxing on his island, until one day he discovers that his banana hoard has been stolen by the villain of this game, King K. Rool. Now it's up to Donkey Kong, with the assistance of his family, to go out on a journey to get the bananas back. Can I just say, I really like this plot. It's basically a more comedic spin on the Mario series plot, being him rescuing the princess, except now it's bananas. This fits in line with Rare's comedic style that goes all over the place during the 90s, and it's a simple plot, but it gets the story forward. After all of that's done, we finally get introduced to the game's world map, and I gotta say, this is one of the more generic things this game has. Don't get me wrong, it is a fairly functional world map. I mean, we have the level selection, we have save points, we have fast travel, but it's not as expansive as I want it to be. Honestly, I think Super Mario World did the world map system a whole lot better, and I was kind of hoping Donkey Kong Country would do something like that, except more expanded. But for what it is, it's fine and it gets the job done. By now, you've probably been bored of me ranting about the non-important stuff of this game. I think it's a better time than any to finally start talking about the real meat of this game, starting off with when most people first experience DKC, they're gonna assume that Donkey Kong has a pretty basic moveset, and at first glance, it seems like that. He can run, he can jump on enemies' heads to kill them, and that's about it. But Rare did add more to this than just the basics. One of the key things they focused on for Donkey Kong's moveset was his movement, specifically the momentum he carries. You see, they wanted Donkey Kong to control and feel different from most platforming heroes, which is why they focus on the momentum and the weight. They really wanted you to feel as if you were playing as a big ape, and I think it works. Platforming in this instance feels a lot more realistic. It's kind of hard to explain, but when you control the game for yourself, you'll know what I mean. It's not as floaty and overly cartoony in style as Mario's platforming. It feels like it has a lot more realism and real world physics, and you have to actually think how you're gonna do an obstacle instead of just mindlessly jumping over it, and this kind of adds a sense of strategy, as well as making the gameplay more interesting than other platforming games. It's kind of like how Sonic the Hedgehog incorporated more speed into the mix to make platforming there feel more fun. Donkey Kong applies the same logic, even though it's not as big as what Sonic did. I argue it's still as impactful, and it makes the game feel fun. And despite the weight and momentum, Donkey Kong is still a really good character to control, and I never feel like I'm out of control when controlling him. But of course, as some of you might know, Donkey Kong is not the only Kong you play as. The secondary Kong in this game is of course Diddy Kong. Now, Diddy controls a lot different from Donkey Kong. You see, for one, Diddy is a lot smaller than Donkey Kong, meaning his momentum and speed is a lot different and more light. If anything, he controls more like traditional platforming heroes, and Diddy's just as fun to play as Donkey Kong, and I think he's a great addition to this game. One of the things I like about this game is the different strategy options it gives you with these two characters. The game has 3 separate modes. You got standalone mode, where you play as either one Kong by themselves. You got the team mode, or the main mode as I consider it, where you play as both Kongs simultaneously, switching between the two by using the top buttons of the controller. And you've got the rivalry mode, where you play as each Kong separately using 2 different remotes. Now, as I stated before, the team option is what I consider the main one, as it's where most of the strategy comes from. What I mean for this is that, let's say there's an instance where there's a big enemy. Now, Donkey Kong is a big character, so he can defeat the enemy in one take. Diddy Kong is a lot smaller but faster, so he can avoid the enemy easily, but in terms of attacking it, it takes him multiple hits before it dies. So switching between the two characters allows for different play and different ways of approaching a level. With that all said, that was all the basic abilities you can do in Donkey Kong Country, but let's talk about some of the more innovative aspects of the game. One of the new things that I really enjoy about this game is the mechanic of picking up barrels. This is an instance where the game takes inspiration from the original Donkey Kong game. In that game, DK would throw barrels at you and they would act as obstacles. In this game, however, you use them to attack enemies and to progress in the level. And I gotta say, this is one of the coolest things Rare added. Not only does it act as a nod to the original games, but it also changes up how we play things. Now, picking up things isn't new to platformers, but I gotta say, I like the way DK uses barrels. And besides picking up things, they can also be used as rocket launchers, which shoot you across level planes. And I gotta say, the barrel idea was just really cool, and was a really innovative way to incorporate something from the original games. Yeah, the level design is really good. Okay, I obviously know I can't end it there, but really, what else can I say that hasn't already been said? Donkey Kong Country has amazing level design. It's tight, it's challenging, and it's creative. It truly is a masterclass at level design. And really, that's all I can say. Sure, I guess future entries have better level design than this game, but again, this is the first entry in the series, so I will give it the benefit of the doubt. The only real problem this game has with its level design would be the level themes. Now, I'm not saying the level themes are bad, it's just that this game suffers from the main problem that the Mario series have, being the fact that the level themes are kind of bad. Now you have your standard grassland, underground area, underwater, snow level, and they're fairly generic. You do however have new interesting themes, being the minecart levels and the factory levels, and while these are fun stages to play through, they are few and far between. Otherwise, the level themes aren't bad, they're just not really all original. But when the game is doing something original, oh man, does it do it well. DKC just oozes with creativity, with each level always changing things up to refresh the gameplay. 1 minute you could be shooting yourself through barrels across the jungle treetops. The next you could be using a stop and go system to avoid sleeping enemies. The next you could be in a minecart going along the tracks, avoiding enemies also riding minecarts. The next it could be pitch black and you have to use a torch to traverse areas. The next it could be a giant maze, and all of this is super fun. Never once do I feel like the game is just adding things for the sake of being a gimmick and for the sake of being there. It always feels like it's pushing the limits of the SNES console, and it's always making the gameplay fun. This is an instance where the game truly evolves the typical Mario formula to create something that stands tall and on its own. DKC's level designs are truly fantastic, and if I'm being honest, I think they beat Super Mario World in terms of quality level design. What more is there really to say about DKC's level design, other than the fact that it's great? Now, it's undeniable that DKC became a great success because it was a great game. It had great level design, great character design, great characterization, and a fun and engaging plot that everyone could enjoy. But we can't also forget that one of its true biggest reasons for its success was its graphics. As we all know, the original Donkey Kong game was one of the biggest games of all time when it originally released. And because of this, the new Donkey Kong game had to be even bigger than that game and had to be the biggest game released in the 90s. Now, how do you make this game become the biggest game of the 90s? You make it look completely different from any other game released during the 90s. Donkey Kong pushed gaming back when it came out, and Donkey Kong Country had to do the same and push technology of modern gaming. Now, the 16-bit era of gaming already was a complete overhaul of the 8-bit era, and it already upgraded gaming as we know it. More colors, more graphics, more level design, better sounding music. It was already pushing what gaming was, and now doing something more than that? Unbelievable! How was DKC able to do this? Well, thanks to the new technology that was 3D. More specifically, pre-rendered 3D models. By using 3D models and recreating them for 2D, DKC was able to have a distinct look that no other game had at that time. I guess you could say the graphics were pretty rad. These are not shades. It simply looked ahead of its time. And well, mechanically, it worked as well as any other 2D game. Graphically, it looked like something never before seen. And when played, it felt like something never played before. DKC was an important and influential game when it came to entering the world of 3D gaming. It allowed many people to experience something closer to 3D. And while mechanically the game doesn't control anything like a 3D game, the graphics and the presentation were good enough to allow more people to focus on heading towards 3D. More games coming after DKC would use the pre-rendered art style, and some games would even use a top-down view to more closely control like a 3D title. DKC was an important game because of its graphics, and was definitely one of the stepping stones to entering the world of 3D gaming. So when looking at the game in terms of that aspect from the graphical point, we can understand why it was such a big success. But another reason why it was so successful because of the graphics was the simple fact that it was cool, edgy, and realistic and totally fitted the tone of the 90s. The 90s were all about looking cool and futuristic, and that's exactly what DKC looked like. Now, to hardcore gamers, this looked like the true evolutionary step in the gaming industry, but for everyone else, it just looked really cool. DKC really did invoke the energy of the 90s, and whether that was an intentional thing or not, it doesn't really matter. Whether you look at the game as the next evolutionary step of gaming, or just as a really cool piece of gaming in the 90s, it doesn't matter. It appeals to everyone, and that's the main goal of a game. Now, to start off going through the game's graphics, let's start off with talking about the art style of the game, and I really love it. This is basically taking a cartoon and making it in 3D. All the characters' models look really well, the designs are fun and suit their personalities. In particular, DK's modern design was a breath of fresh air. It just takes the original design, adds cool 90ness to it, and gives him a tie, and that's about it. And the simplicity of it still makes it fun like the original design, but of course makes it look a little newer and differentiates it from the original game. In general, the art style of the game is really fun, from the main characters and the enemies. All of it is intriguing and really does fit the cartoon aesthetic that Nintendo just loves to shove in your face. One of the graphical things I like in particular is the level backgrounds, and my gosh, are they just not beautiful. From the sunset vista of the jungle levels, to the rain, to the factory background, to the underground area of the underground mines, to the backgrounds of the jungle treetops. All of it is fun and intriguing. This makes Donkey Kong Country feel like a country. It makes the world feel lived in. It has a culture to it. It's intriguing. It makes me want to explore. And I like how every level has a different, distinct background that makes it feel like you're in a different area. It's just so nice to look at. I think the coolest thing about all this nice graphics is that it doesn't interfere with the game. The game could have just been style over substance, but that's not the case. DKC has a really fun aesthetic, but still has really fun gameplay. One doesn't overpower the other. It all works together to create a beautiful blend that is this game. DKC manages to have a fantastic art style with fantastic character design and fantastic backgrounds, while still being a fun game that delivers on being the next step in platforming. It still manages to be a really great platformer with great level design, but at the same time having a great aesthetic. And I think these two factors coming together is what makes DKC a magical title. Now, of course, we can't end off talking about Donkey Kong Country without mentioning one of the key things that really makes this game. I'm of course referring to This is David Wise, a video game composer who started his career all the way back in the 80s working for Rareware. Now, David was always about pushing the limits of video game music. He knew that 8-bit systems were not capable of producing the music that he wanted to hear, but he still pushed anyways, and he created some of the most technically advanced pieces of music you could find on 8-bit systems. And when the 90s rolled around, it was a brand new age for video game music, and David took advantage of this. 90s consoles such as the Sega Genesis and the SNES were able to produce higher quality music than ever before. And while yes, it did sound better than 8-bit console music, David Wise still knew he could do more. He knew he could truly push the limits of these consoles in terms of music, which is why it made perfect sense for him to become the new composer of DKC. After all, he already has a relationship with Rareware, and he knew that the project was all about being next level, so it made total sense for him to do a next level video game soundtrack. And by all means, this soundtrack was truly next level. Seriously, I can't believe that this type of music is coming out of this type of console. DKC's soundtrack is definitely one of the best you can find on the SNES. Hell, it's one of the best soundtracks in video game history. And I'm here to explain why that is. When the game first starts up, you're greeted with a very familiar tune. The game starts off with the original Donkey Kong theme, but this time remastered for the new age of the 90s. I really like what they've done here. Not only is it nostalgic for people finally coming back to the series, but it's also a great way to show the progression of the series, starting off with the theme playing much simpler before getting all funky and adding 90s elements to it. It's nice. After that's all done, we get sent to the first level of the game, where we're finally introduced to the true main theme of Donkey Kong Country, with a track called Island Swing. Right off the bat, we can already hear the high quality of David Wise's music. For starters, the samples used sound real in a way that no other SNES game has felt. Like, I'm not saying any other SNES games have bad soundtracks or anything, but this sounds real, like it's played with real instruments. And the style, the genre used is way different from the cartoony sounding music of other SNES games. David Wise went for an atmospheric and relaxing soundtrack as opposed to a more high energetic soundtrack you would expect from a platformer like this. This was done to complement the visuals of the game as opposed to the actual gameplay, and I think this works just as well. I mean, for crying out loud, the first level of the game takes place in a jungle where you're swinging on vines, and the genre of the music is swing. I mean, come on, that's just brilliant. And as mentioned before, Island Swing becomes the main theme of the Donkey Kong Country series, with the theme returning in different variations throughout not only this game, but the entire series. And besides Island Swing, there are tons of other great musical pieces, not only in this game, but the entire Donkey Kong series, from Gangplank Galleon to Stickerbush Symphony, all being great and iconic in their own ways. But I'm sure, as all of you know, you can't talk about the music of DKC without mentioning Aquatic Ambience. Wise knew that for the underwater levels, he needed to create a piece of music that could truly transport you into an underwater atmosphere. The underwater theme for this game was one of the hardest pieces of music that Wise had to write in his entire career. To simply put it, the quality of this music was just too strong for the SNES to handle, but simply through sheer force and effort, Wise was able to finally realize this piece, and my gosh, isn't it great? From the amazing soundscape, to the sound effects, to the sound design, to the beautiful melody, it's all gorgeous. There's a reason why Aquatic Ambience is considered one of the greatest underwater level themes of all time. David Wise did truly create a groundbreaking soundtrack, and while future games would have even better sounding music due to the advancements of technology, I still find myself going back to this soundtrack. There's just something really special about it, and it is one of the best you can find on the SNES. Donkey Kong Country has a great soundtrack, and the overall experience from it is amazing. Donkey Kong Country ends with you heading towards the villain's lair, and you fight him in a boss fight. To some, they may find this challenging, but to me, it was kinda easy. After that is all done, you finally receive your banana hoard, and with that comes the end of DKC. And man, what a fantastic game this was! DKC is everything I could have ever wanted in a platformer. Great level design, a fantastic art style, fun and likable characters, fun antagonists, a great sense of fun and imagination, great music. Everything you could want in a great platformer is in this game. To fans of that genre, DKC offers everything you could want. And for people who are fans of the original title, this reboot must have been a great surprise to them. It surpasses not only the original games that came before it, but even the games it's inspired from. DKC is how you do it, and that's why so many people still talk about this game to this day and praise it with so much high regard. DKC in its own right became an influential title, people using its graphical style and its music and its level design and all making games inspired from it. But despite all of that, I still think DKC is the best of the best. It's just a great game overall. The people behind it really understood Donkey Kong, really understood Mario, understood Nintendo. Rare deserves an applause for bringing back Donkey Kong, and even to this day, we can see how the impact of DKC stayed strong. DKC is a magical title. And with all of that said, this was the magic of Donkey Kong Country. Oh, there you go. Nearly 30 plus years later, and DKC still one of the best games I've ever played.